Welcome to another What I Would Have Done Thursday, and today I'm going to be briefly discussing the sequel to the animated Titanic musical, and I technically would call this the other Titanic um, animated movie because it almost doesn't deserve a title because it is that horrible. Um, this takes what the first movie did horribly wrong and umps it up to the highest level possible. I mean, it's just unbelievable how far they go down the barrel to try to pull out a story from Titanic. Um, and I kind of want to go into sort of what I would have done since I discussed the initial film last week. And although there are a lot of similar things that this film does wrong that the first film does wrong as well, it just does it in a very almost not only insulting way, but in a way to where you don't even really get how somebody could come up with something like it. So without further ado, it's kind of depressing in one way and also hilarious how awful this sequel is. Even though it's really technically not a sequel, it's just kind of taking the Titanic story and just redoing it and having sort of new characters involved. And the animals are back like they were from the original. And they really do put a temperament to this film because they make the film happy-go-lucky cheesy and with really no substance behind them whatsoever. So really, again, like I've mentioned before in the uh, with the initial animated Titanic musical movie, I definitely would have scrapped all of these animals, in particular these mice, because they are just unbelievable as to how much damage that they do to this film, as well as the sharks. Yeah, there are sharks in this one, and dolphins and whales, and all of that. They're all in there, and they all play an important part to the story. And had they not existed at all, this film would have allowed itself to be so much more better already by them not being present. So, yeah, the fact that they are all uh, inserted not only into the story as sort of side characters, but the fact that they play such a huge role as far as what things happen within the plot. Oh yeah, and an octopus is in this as well. By the way, it's the octopus who throws the iceberg that causes the Titanic to hit the iceberg. Yeah, an octopus apparently caused Titanic. Perfect history lesson. Totally no way, shape, or form sugarcoating a tragedy that just happened by accident. Um, and then there's some really poorly thought out message about whales. And then there are dolphins that can talk to humans based on tears, and yeah, just having all of these animals in there. Usually they are a huge asset to animated films, in particular to Disney films, because they make them charming and they really lighten up the sad moments. But here they're not only a complete distraction, but they also are a huge detriment to the film's potential. So I definitely would have scrapped all of them. I think that these animals serve no real purpose. And what makes the mice, I think, incredibly sort of insulting is the fact that they're the ones sort of telling the story of how exactly supposedly Titanic happened, and there's one mouse is sort of telling all of the other mice how exactly it went down, and in no way, shape, or form resembles the actual tragedy. And again, the fact that they do it in this way is just so cringeworthy. And I understand, obviously, taking creative licenses when it comes to history. That is totally fine. But the way that they do this is just unbelievably stupid. I mean, you can complain about Pocahontas or whatever other historical type animated film that was uh, not necessarily historically accurate. But when you look at this film and you see what it does with the history and the material, it does not do itself justice. So, yeah, all of that could have been really stopped by not having these animals there. And really, it's the animals that ultimately sugarcoat and sort of distort the reality behind the Titanic. So, yeah, that's definitely something that I would have definitely changed. Also, the interesting thing about Titanic that I think they could have focused on, at least if they were trying to make a sequel through sort of a different perspective, would have been the crew. Um, they're sort of minor characters in Titanic, and there is a certain level of, I guess, sadness involved with those characters, especially when you see the captain sort of completely distraught by what's happening. But I think they definitely could have had an opportunity to explore those characters a lot more, and I think that this would have been a perfect opportunity to do so, and instead focus on these men and people that were involved within the crew work, like the people that were actually working on the Titanic to make sure that everything was operating well and all of that. And you can really see it through a really more in-depth and interesting perspective, because these are the people that ultimately had to deal with this circumstance that ended up happening, and sort of even have a certain level of guilt because of the responsibility that is put onto them. So I think that exploration would have been a lot more interesting than trying to do what they do within this film, which is basically they recreate Titanic pretty much to the T. And I mean Titanic, the animated, or the actual live action Titanic, James Cameron version Titanic. They take really pretty much everything. Like they have a villain, they have a woman who doesn't want to marry some guy, and she falls for another guy, and they really hone in on these similar aspects, and um, it really doesn't serve the film ultimately well because they're executed so poorly. So it definitely makes sense here that if this would have been about the crew, I think we could have gotten a lot more interesting interpretation. Um, so that also is important to note. And another thing um, about this film that's also very stupid and also quite insulting is the fact that they tried to connect Titanic not only with animals accidentally sort of causing it, but by linking it to the actual villains of the film, like human villains within the film. Like that they have to that the animals have to somehow create this tragedy um, for the villains within the film, uh, and the human villains, because they have human villains. And it's just so unbelievably contrived, and oh, it's so horrible. It's like it's literally the rapping dog is so much better. I mean, it's just unbelievable just uh how out of touch these people were as far as when they were putting this film together. Um, so I think that you could have definitely taken those villains away. You don't need villains within a Titanic film. The villain is the iceberg. That's all you need. That's all that is required of a film like this. Nothing else. I think that just definitely goes without saying. So um, yeah, completely scrap the villains. Just make it about the crew and how they handle things on the ship, and how they develop bonds with each other and whatnot. Um, Maybe you could even have like sort of a love story on the side, and some friendship, and some, and you can have the captain sort of the authority figure, and You can sort of see him kind of uh, dealing with the fact that he's getting fairly old, and I believe the captain of the Titanic was supposedly supposed to retire after he was done uh, with the journey with Titanic. So they could have explored that avenue as well, and that would have lended itself a whole lot better for a sequel. I think with like an initial film, like just like I've said before, like just addressing some people that you know they can be fictionalized. I don't think they necessarily need to be actual people that were on the ship, but just addressing the common folk that were on the ship, I think is a good sort of introduction. And then having a sequel that involves the crew adds a whole nother dimension. So I think, again, like I said before, I think that would have added a lot more to it. Uh, but yeah, those are really ultimately all of the changes that I would have made to this product. I mean, I would say this is definitely far worse than the first film, only because it just takes the level of dumbing down, and it just takes it to a whole nother, I would even say dimension almost, because it's just so unbelievably ridiculous what they come up with for a film about Titanic. And the fact that they not only make it sort of more serendipity, they make it even way more serendipity than it was within the original film. Especially when they act like everybody survived the Titanic as well. So again, there's just a lot that they do with this film that really takes it to a level of just another level that wasn't initially there within the first film. So, yeah, I mean, those are just my honest thoughts, though. I'd be more than happy to hear what anybody else has to say in regards to what they would have done if they were in charge. But those are really the ideas that I could probably come up with as far as trying to figure out exactly where to place the focus on, and uh, try to tell the story of Titanic in the form of a sequel. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say, though. I will try to see if I can do some research on a third film of this. Yes, there's a third film of this that came out that is considered to be really bad. And I don't know how bad it is, but we'll sort of see. And it'd be interesting to see what I could come up with, if I can come up with something about that. But until next time, everybody, bye bye.